What if I told you that the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one screaming for attention, but the quiet one in the corner who's been pushed too far? Stay with me, because what Carl Jung discovered about human psychology will completely change how you see empaths forever. Carl Jung said that every individual carries within them both light and shadow, and nowhere is this more evident than in the misunderstood empath. You see, people mistake empathy for weakness, but Jung's research revealed something far more complex and frankly terrifying. Here's what most people don't understand about empaths. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll never underestimate one again. According to Carl Jung, the human psyche operates on multiple levels. The persona, our public mask, often conceals our true nature. But what happens when someone with extraordinary emotional intelligence finally removes that mask? What Jung discovered about the shadow self will shock you. Empaths live in what Jung called the tension of opposites. They feel everything deeply, yet they've learned to contain that intensity. They see through deception, yet they choose to believe in people's potential for good. This isn't naivety. It's what Jung termed the transcendent function, the ability to hold contradictory truths simultaneously. But here's where it gets dangerous and why narcissists should be terrified. Carl Jung said that the most integrated individuals are those who have faced their shadow and emerged whole. Empaths, through repeated betrayal and manipulation, are forced into this integration process earlier and more intensely than most. They don't just understand light, they intimately know darkness because they've been pushed into it. The narcissist sees the empath as compassion and makes a fatal miscalculation. They think they're dealing with someone weak, someone controllable. But Jung's research revealed something far more complex and frankly terrifying. Listen carefully to what happens next, because this is where the tables turn completely. According to Carl Jung's theory of individuation, every person must eventually confront their authentic self. For most people, this happens gradually, if at all. But for empaths who've been betrayed, this process accelerates dramatically. The pain becomes a catalyst for what Jung called psychological rebirth. Here's what Jung understood that most people miss. Emotional sensitivity isn't a weakness, it's advanced pattern recognition. Empaths don't just feel emotions, they decode them, analyze them, store them. Every manipulation, every lie, every act of emotional violence gets cataloged in their psyche, not as bitterness, but as data. And when that data reaches a critical mass, that's when you witness something Jung called the emergence of the self. And it's absolutely unstoppable. Carl Jung discovered that the most powerful transformations happen not in comfort, but in crisis. He called this enaniadromia, the tendency for things to turn into their opposite when pushed to extremes. The empath who has been patient becomes unmovable. The one who was giving becomes selective. The one who was forgiving becomes final. This isn't about becoming cold or cruel. Jung understood that true strength emerges when someone integrates their shadow, when they acknowledge their capacity for boundaries, for saying no, for walking away. The empath doesn't lose their heart, they gain their backbone. But here's what will absolutely blow your mind about what happens next. According to Carl Jung, there's a difference between being unconsciously reactive and consciously responsive. Most people operate from their wounds. They lash out. They seek revenge. They try to hurt others as they've been hurt.
But the transformed empath operates from what Jung called conscious choice. They don't need to destroy their betrayer because they've already won a far more important battle. the one within themselves. Jung said that the greatest victory is not conquering others, but conquering the parts of yourself that would drag you down to their level. And this is where the narcissist realizes they've made a catastrophic error in judgment. Carl Jung observed that manipulators rely on predictable reactions. They need you to chase, to explain, to fight for the relationship. But when an empath reaches what Jung called psychological autonomy, they become immune to these tactics. They stop playing the game entirely. Jung discovered that the most powerful position in any dynamic is detachment born from understanding, not withdrawal born from fear. The awakened empath doesn't retreat because they're heard. They step back because they finally see clearly. What happens next will redefine everything you thought you knew about power dynamics. According to Carl Jung's research on psychological types, empaths possess what he called feeling function dominance. But this isn't emotional instability, it's sophisticated emotional intelligence. They can read between the lines, sense incongruence, detect manipulation before it's even fully formed. But here's the twist Jung identified. When this emotional intelligence combines with hard-earned wisdom, it creates something unprecedented. The empath stops being reactive and becomes strategic. They don't operate from pain anymore. They operate from power. And the transformation that follows? Jung had a specific term for it, and it's absolutely game-changing. Carl Jung called it the transcendent function, the ability to hold tension without breaking, to see truth without becoming bitter, to choose response over reaction. The empath who has been forged in a fire of betrayal develops this transcendent function at a level most people never reach. They become what Jung termed individuated, complete unto themselves. They no longer need external validation to know their worth. They no longer require others' approval to trust their perceptions. They stop being dependent on anyone who doesn't appreciate their depth. But here's the part that will send chills down your spine. According to Carl Jung's theory of psychological development, there comes a moment when an individual stops seeking external completion and becomes whole within themselves. For the betrayed empath, this moment is both liberation and revolution. They stop convincing others of their worth. They stop explaining their boundaries. They stop apologizing for their needs. They reach what Jung called psychological sovereignty, complete ownership of their emotional world. But the final transformation, this is what Jung called the return to the self, and it's absolutely magnificent. Carl Jung discovered that true strength isn't the absence of sensitivity, it's sensitivity refined by wisdom. The fully awakened empath embodies this paradox perfectly. They feel deeply, but love selectively. They understand completely, but engage cautiously. They forgive fully, but never forget. Jung said that the most integrated individuals are those who can hold both their light and their shadow in conscious awareness. The transformed empath has learned to be gentle with those who deserve it and firm with those who require it. They've mastered what Jung called appropriate response. And here's the final piece that makes them absolutely untouchable. According to Carl Jung's theory of psychological development, there comes a moment when an individual stops seeking external completion and becomes whole within themselves. For the betrayed empath, this moment is both liberation and revolution. They stop convincing others of their worth. They stop explaining their boundaries. They stop apologizing for their needs. They reach what Jung called psychological sovereignty, complete ownership of their emotional world. But the final transformation, this is what Jung called the individuated empath, and they're the most powerful force you'll ever encounter. Carl Jung said that when someone has integrated their shadow, faced their demons, and emerged whole, they become what he termed a force of nature. Not destructive, but unstoppable. Not aggressive, but absolutely certain. The fully awakened empath doesn't seek revenge because they've transcended the need for it. They don't need to prove their worth because they know it intimately. They don't fear being alone because they've learned to be excellent company for themselves. They become what Jung termed individuated individuals who have transformed their deepest wounds into their greatest strengths. They are dangerous not because they attack, but because they cannot be manipulated, controlled, or broken again. And that, according to Carl Jung's lifetime of research, is the most terrifying thing a narcissist can face. Someone who has learned to love themselves as fiercely as they once loved others. The empath's journey from victim to sovereign is not just personal transformation, it's what Jung called the hero's journey of the psyche. They descend into darkness, face their shadows, integrate their power, and emerge not just healed, but wholly. Carl Jung discovered that suffering, when consciously embraced and psychologically processed, becomes the raw material for wisdom. The empath who has walked through fire doesn't just survive. They become the light that guides others out of their own darkness. They are living proof of Jung's greatest insight, that within every wound lies the seed of transcendence, and within every betrayal lies the invitation to become more authentic, more powerful, and more whole than ever before. This is the psychology of the awakened empath, and once you understand it, you'll never underestimate the quiet strength of someone who has learned to transform their pain into power, their wounds into wisdom, and their deepest suffering into their greatest strength.